I hate to ask because sometimes if I ask, you just might not get the
answer. You get a letdown?
Yeah, you don't want to get the answer that you don't want to get. So am I hot or cold that there might be a story time for today's episode?
Well, as we teased last episode, there is a part 2 to the story we've been telling. Today is the part 2.
Today's part 2. Okay.
Of the 1964 North American tour that they did.
I'm going to get my BB, my boo-boo, my blankie, my baba.
Bebe.
My bebe. I'm going to get all that sort of stuff. I'm going to get little cozy and hedgy, or however you pronounce that, in some Scandinavian country. I'm going to go ahead and get myself ready for a pleasurable experience of a story time.
Yes, get all your relaxing items together and cuddle in.
I thought you were going to say laxatives.
Just take too many laxatives, and while you're recovering, listen to my story. This part is called The $150,000 Show.
That's a good title.
So we pick up where we left off. We left our boys in Indianapolis. Nope. Where were they last? Oh, it was Indianapolis. Okay. We last left the Fab Four in Indianapolis, where they narrowly escaped death, at least a prediction of their death. And they went from Indianapolis to Milwaukee next. They had an MC for the show named Bob Berry. He interviewed them before the show, but his tape was stolen. And the radio station he worked for on the air asked for someone to return it. And an anonymous caller told them exactly where it was, on a pew in a chapel in the St. Francis Convent. And perhaps it was a "you need Jesus" moment. Don't listen to the Beatles.
Listen to Jesus.
You want your tape? It's in a church.
Listen to a Jesus tape.
It's almost like they got hacked.
Could say.
You could say they got their assets stolen, but returned by a white hat hacker. From there, they went to Chicago. They did a press conference there where a girl brought handcuffs and wanted to handcuff herself to Paul. She was not successful. That probably would have been a story we would have heard, but she was intercepted before she got to Paul. It was here Ringo was presented with a gold snare drum, a golden snare drum. I don't know if it was all gold. Maybe it was gold leafed, but it was a real gold snare drum inscribed with his name from the Ludwig Drum Company. The president, named William Ludwig Jr., presented it at the press conference.
I'm not going to say another little Billy, but that's another little Billy.
Good boy. He's a little binky. So then they went to Detroit after Chicago. Another hotel, another show, another press conference. They had a press conference before every show. That was just how they had to do it. From there, they went to Toronto in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, have you been to Toronto before?
No, but I've been to Toronto before.
Yeah, right. You've been to Toronto. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it's a lovely place. They stayed at the King Edward Hotel, which is now called the King Eddie. Two twin sisters, Edith and Herta Minea, hoped to meet the Beatles at this hotel. There's a million of these stories, but this one I wanted to include because months prior to the Beatles' arrival, they scoped out the hotel for anything that they could think of that might help them meet the Beatles. They had been planning this for months, not days or hours, months. They settled on the quick return box for the hotel room keys, like a box you can slide the key into, but you can't grab the keys out of them. So before the Beatles arrived, they used a stick with some chewing gum put on the end, and they fished out a returned key and used it to get past security. They were walking in and they're like, "Are you staying at the hotel?" They flashed the key. They're like, "Yeah, look."
Duh. Why else would I have this key covered in gum?
They kind of socially hacked that situation. Yes. When the Beatles arrived, the chaos knocked over the two twins, all the crowd and people when they were there, and George stepped on Edith.
Might have been a win for them.
Cutting her hand. open.
Oh.
Regardless, even though her hand was stepped on, Edith grabbed a hold of Paul's boot, and he said, hi. And then the group made it into the elevator, and the twins just were there on the floor, broken hand, and they were very satisfied with the outcome.
Yeah, that's a win.
Then they went to another place in Canada, Montreal, and the Quebec Liberation Front had recently been bombing places and sending death threats to the Queen Mother, and they viewed the Beatles as a British export. They got a lot of trouble for this. They got a lot of death threats, and Ringo was even targeted specifically for being an English Jew, which he is not Jewish. Regardless, Epstein got more security, including 2 plainclothes detectives that traveled with them everywhere while they were there due to this civil unrest. I think Ringo mentions that in the anthology as well. Then they traveled to Key West. It's probably the longest leg of their journey from Montreal to Key West. There was a hurricane going on at this time. This tour has everything. And they were told to spend the 2 days before, so they were going to play Jacksonville. And so in order to avoid the weather, they went to Key West, which apparently escapes a lot of the weather when hurricanes come through for whatever reason. So they just flew straight to Key West. The reason that this was such a big leg of the journey is because they were going to play, I wrote Montgomery, but I assume that's Montgomery. They were going to play a show in Montgomery, Alabama, but the writer said, the agreement for the show said the Beatles would not play for segregated audiences, and they didn't comply. And so they canceled the show. So they went right to Florida. They checked into the Key Wester, and they just hung out for a few days and were visited by a ton of influential people from the area and swam at the pool and had a Southern cookout for the first time, saw music, bought new albums. And this was the moment that Paul writes about in his song Here Today. He references a night that he shared with John. That Here Today is about John, if you didn't know. And he says, what about the night we cried because there wasn't any reason left to keep it all inside? From there, they went from Key West to Jacksonville. The city was completely destroyed by the hurricane. By the time they got there, they said it looked like a war zone. Right before they arrived, President Lyndon Johnson had recently visited because of the damage, and the Beatles had to go into a holding pattern with their plane because Air Force One was trying to leave. So they had to just wait until the Air Force One was gone. And actually, some of the security that protected the president stayed and helped protect the Beatles. When they played at the show there in Jacksonville, there were some cameramen that had been following the Beatles on tour, getting newsreel footage. And they had been following the Beatles, and the Beatles were getting it. Well, the Beatles inner circle, the admin team was getting annoyed that these people were trying to be opportunistic. They had tried to film every show in every venue so far, but they were not getting authorized to do so. So here at the Gator Bowl, they showed up again, tried to film. Epstein figured that they would be, selling this footage without any royalties paid. So they were like, no, we got to stop this. In order to make them leave, Derek Taylor went on stage before the Beatles came on and said the Beatles would not come on stage until these, quote, 8 cameramen left, appealing to the crowd to boo them out of the arena.
Whoa.
They ended up doing so, and later the inner circle would call this the Jacksonville Address, the thing that Derek Taylor did. From there, they went to Boston. From there, they went to Baltimore, and in Baltimore, between sets, they had a press conference. Some girls tried to mail themselves in a big box labeled Beatles fan mail, but they were found before they were delivered to the Beatles. A guitar teacher, it is said, to have asked Derek Taylor if the band could sign his Rickenbacker while they were there in Baltimore. Apparently, the next morning, he brought it to the Beatles and had them sign it. And the problem is that we hear that George would have been in a different hotel because he was sick with the flu. An autograph expert has analyzed the signatures on the guitar and claimed that Neil Aspinall signed George's name. If it is George's signature, the reason I prefaced with that is that if that was George's signature, this would be the only known guitar to be signed by every Beatle. But of course it wasn't, so then it isn't. So doesn't even matter. Off to Pittsburgh, off to Cleveland. In Cleveland, during the show, the fans rushed the stage and the show had to be stopped. And for this reason, the mayor banned the Beatles from the city. Although that didn't last, they played there again. Then down to New Orleans, and the mayor declared Beatles Day in New Orleans and gave them keys to the city. If you could find out any information about this, extra reading for y'all. He ended up converting the Beatles visiting New Orleans to like find a way to get teenagers to clean up their highways. So look up the story. It's very interesting. And then September 17th, one of the last shows of the tour, we got Kansas City. Okay, so this show was not originally planned when they started the tour. So how did this happen? Many random cities were trying to make a bid to get the Beatles to come to their city, as you might imagine. After most of the tour is planned, a Kansas City promoter, whose name Charles Finley, was determined to get the Beatles there at any cost. A usual fee for the Beatles at this point, which was expected of the promoters, was about $20,000 to $30,000, plus 60% gross tickets. If no one came to the show for whatever reason, the Beatles walk away with 20 to 30K, period. End of story. And then on top of that, they get some tickets. So Finley offered 60K. Said, we're going to get them there at any cost. He met with Epstein at the Cow Palace in San Francisco.
Yes, correct.
But Brian declined. This was supposed to be a rest day, and this was a busy leg of the tour. So they're like, no, they're resting. No show that day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Finley, determined to get the Beatles, met with Epstein in Los Angeles before the Hollywood Bowl. And he's like, okay. 100K. Once again, Brian turned him down. Right there, Finley tore the check up and wrote a new one for 150K. Said, how about now?
Ooh.
$150,000. Brian said, well, I'll talk to the boys. He went into the back room, and the Beatles were playing a card game. And he goes, we have a day off, but I've just been offered a lot of money. Could we do a show in Kansas City on that day? I'm sorry to ask, whatever. John says, I'll do what you want. So Brian returned and he accepted it, making it the largest cost to bring a band up until that point. Finley had to set the prices of tickets so high to try and make back some of the money, but they were so expensive, they weren't selling that much. So he just said, yeah, they're going to be $2 a pop just to fill the place up. Tickets were usually about $5. He charged $9 initially and then audibled to $2. So I don't know what. This guy is obviously not a great businessman. So they played that, and before the show, Finley thought he owned the Beatles, I suppose it makes sense. You pay $150K for an evening, you think, okay, well, at least I could go talk to them. So he came to their dressing room and asked if they could play a longer show because of the circumstances, and John said no. Charles even offered more money for a longer show for some reason. John said, we never play more than 11, Chuck. You shouldn't have paid all that money. Before they went on, he tried one more time, and they said, no, we're doing the 11. That's it. Thank you. And despite this, they opened the show with Kansas City. So they did play a longer show. It worked out. Once again, the fans rushed the field. The show was stopped. Derek Taylor had to go on everything, whatever. That happened almost every show. Okay, so then they went to Dallas. They were nervous because JFK had, been shot there the previous year in Dallas, and they believed that everyone was gun-toting cowboys that lived there. They didn't get shot. But
good.
Similar to the scene in Australia, in Melbourne, they were at the hotel. The girls were pushing up against the glass windows of the hotel. And in Australia, they were worried that they were going to buckle and crash through. That happened here, but in this case, the window did break. And it seriously lacerated 4 girls who were brought to the hospital.
Oh.
Yeah. Crazy. September 19th, they went to the Pigman Ranch, which we kind of talked about a few episodes ago with Abby. The owner of the American Flyers airline, which they were using to fly around the country, his name was Reed Pigman. Offered his ranch, his secluded ranch near Alton, Missouri. So this is kind of out of the way for them, but they're like, a day off, and we just get to do nothing and hang out at a ranch. Let's do it. This is where they celebrated Brian Epstein's birthday. They rode horses, drove golf carts, and finally, New York, September 20th. They played a charity show for handicapped children, cerebral palsy children, and Ed Sullivan and others emceed it. There are other bands on the bill, so they kind of were working around this event for a lot of the tour. Other people on the bill were Leslie Uggams, the Brothers Four, the Tokens, Bobby Goldsboro, the Shangri-Las, Nancy Ames, and Jackie DeShannon, who had already been on tour with the Beatles. Jackie DeShannon was one of the opening acts of the North American tour in 1964, and once again they saw Bob Dylan backstage. So they had just seen him like a few weeks earlier, the marijuana incident we discussed.
We did.
And now they saw him again. And the show was mentioned as particularly good. I suppose you play an entire tour on the road every day, you're gonna, get your chops down.
Like a well-oiled machine.
And they had just, earned $150K for a single show. You shouldn't have paid all that money, Chuck. Downstairs after the show, there's a champagne party, or champagne party, and it was thrown in their honor, and they didn't attend. They had to stay at the Riviera Idlewild Motel because no one in Manhattan wanted them. And it was here that Brian yelled at Derek Taylor in public for taking a limo to the airport that was meant for Brian. And Derek resigned from the organization right then and there. Apparently they made up on the plane ride home to England, but Taylor kept with his decision and he decided to quit the organization, and he was replaced by Tony Barrow on the 65 and 66 tours the Beatles went on. But don't forget about Derek Taylor. He might appear again in the story.
I probably will, but I'll try.
But for now, he's out. I mean, as far as we know now, Derek Taylor shan't return. The tour was reported to have made $1.2 million before expenses. The IRS took $300,000 of that money. But the lawyers at NEMS argued that they're not an American-based company, so that tax wouldn't apply. And eventually the IRS agreed with that. And in 1968, they gave them that money back plus 6% interest.
Let's go. A big win for the boys.
Heck yeah, NEMS. Legal team. That's the North American tour story.
Thank you.
You're welcome.